Finx, it's a very unique brawler, there are no doubts about that. But within all of that uniqueness, it seems to also have come some midness in the middle of everything. And I'm not the first person to talk about this, because Finx just simply has a couple of tiny issues that just come together and kinda ruin everything for him. So today I'm gonna talk about all of these issues, about a couple of interactions and a couple of problems and some weird stuff about his super as well. And in the end I'll also give my opinion on what changes Finx needs in order to become a good brawler. Hope you enjoy, and let's start the video with the most basic thing, his basic attack. So you already know he has 3 projectiles on his main attack, a big one in the middle and 2 smaller to the sides. And the first slightly easier thing to tell is that the 2 extra projectiles to the sides have actually a 1/3 of a tile less range. This means that in diagonal fights, Finx actually does not have an advantage. For example, Gale has an advantage on diagonal attacks because his attack is just so wide that it's almost like if he had bonus range. Finx, because of this tiny adjustment, he does not have that advantage. As for the second detail about his second attack that a couple of people I think probably never even noticed this, is that hitting your big projectile or hitting your projectiles to the sides charges your super by the same amount. And I tested this, it's 100% true. Hitting the side projectiles charges as much super as hitting the big projectile. And this is honestly very weird considering how charge rate in general in this game works. It's a very weird detail, but I don't know why they decided to go this route honestly, but that in some case scenarios can be good. But because of this means that hitting your main projectile doesn't grant you any advantage besides bonus damage, which is kind of a bad thing. And lastly, still talking about his basic attack, it's impossible to hit your attack if you're within like 1 tile of range and you're using the auto attack, because it's the main projectile that's in the middle, and because of how this projectile kind of works, it's just impossible to hit anything besides the main projectile with the auto aim in close range. So you would think that because he has more projectiles in close range, he's gonna get value out of all projectiles, but in reality that's not what it happens. In reality you usually only hit the middle projectile, and that just drastically reduces the damage. You immediately feel the lack of burst damage while you're very close to the enemies. It's honestly really bad. Now we need to talk about his super. His super in theory should be really good because it gives area control to your teammates, because it's just so much easier to land your shots that essentially the enemy needs to run away out of your range in order to dodge your shots. And guess what? That's exactly what they do. They just run away off your super. So you cannot get value from the super. It's an insanely annoying thing that just happens a lot. Enemies most of the times just run away off your super, and that just makes you not get any value from the super, which is a super that already takes a long time to get. Secondly, the super doesn't even last that much, which is a big problem as well. It only lasts 7 seconds. I know you have the second star power, but the super lasting a good amount of time should not be correlated to the star power. In my eyes, I feel like that is not the way to do it. And not to mention that it's not guaranteed as well. It relies on you hitting your shots, which again can be kind of a problem. Lastly, the super, it's just so small that it's hard to get value from enemy shots. I actually thought that it would be easy to just dodge everything inside the super, and it's a lot easier, but at the same time, if the enemy hits any sort of AoE like a Frank attack, what can you really do besides running away? It's good, but it just simply does not give you that much value. I feel like that is the major issue with this super, honestly. And then you have 2 tiny things, which is You get a damage boost while you're inside the super. It's a very weird detail, honestly, not to mention that you also get a charge rate buff while you're inside the super. This could also be why sometimes it feels easy to cycle supers, but not to get the first super. The bonus damage also changes your charge rate, and that's why this is happening. So, with this damage buff, apparently Supercell thought it was necessary to reduce by 5% the amount of projectile speed buff that you grant yourself. It's a very weird change that I just don't get why they did it. It's a very tiny nerf that doesn't even seem to make sense. And if anything, I feel like the bonus damage it's the weird one here, because why would you really need bonus damage on a controller? Especially at medium range, it just makes no sense. Then we have the gadgets. I will say both of the gadgets are not horrible, but the first gadget it's hard to get consistent value. If I had to say, it's easier to use Max's gadget and to get value because the gadget heals you. But with Finx's gadget, I mean, you need to track how much ammo you had, where you're going to travel back. It's a lot of tiny details that you need to think about before you even consider using the gadget. It's a good gadget, it's just hard to get a lot of value from it, especially because you can lose ammo with this gadget, which I will say it's a big of a problem. That's why I usually try to go with the second gadget, it's my favorite. But the second gadget, just freezing enemies in time, it's really cool and it looks amazing, but it doesn't actually grant you that much value. So it's a bit of a tough choice between a hard to get value gadget or a gadget that it's hard to get value and it's also hard to hit. So gadgets are not horrible, but are not good for sure. Then we have Star Powers, and Star Powers it's about the same thing. You either get a reload speed nerf that practically you cannot even tell it's happening, like it's just an boring star power, or you can use the second star power, which is very visual, very appealing, but again the enemy will just run away off your super if they have brain cells. So another ability that's just hard to get value from it. And on top of all of this, Finx does not have any sort of mythic gear or hypercharge, which considering how many brawlers have hypercharges, that by itself it's already a really big nerf. So all of these combined just makes Finx's life even harder. With all of this being said, now I'm gonna suggest a couple balance changes that I think that Finx deserves, and also give him a hypercharge and a mythic gear. So starting off with his basic attack, the range would be increased from 8.33 tiles to 9 tiles. He is meant to be more of a long range brawler, clearly, due to his lack of damage up close, but he doesn't have the range to do so. So this buff would help him out with that. And then I will also give a change to his charge rate. So now, the big projectile, it only takes 6 hits to charge the super. But in compensation, the tiny projectiles only charge your super. Instead of being for 9 of them, it will now cost you 12. This will make charging your super make more sense, because you usually hit the big projectile. This is overall a tiny buff, but I am telling you, overall this would not change that many stuff about your super charge rate. Speaking of the super would also have a couple changes. To start off, the radius of the super would be slightly increased from 3 tiles to 3.33 tiles, which it is the same as Meeple. It's a tiny difference, but I think that in these comparisons side by side, you should be able to tell it. The super duration would also be increased from 7 seconds to 8 seconds. This will make it easier to also get more value and more area control out of your super, which is really good. Your self projectile speed boost will be increased from plus 25% to plus 30%, which it's the same as your allies have. Makes way much more sense. Why would he be different from his allies? But in compensation to all of these buffs to the super, the damage buff while you're inside your own super, it's non-existent. It's no longer a thing, which would rebalance all of these buffs to the super really. As for the first gadget, I won't really change anything. I think that it's fine as it is. As for the second gadget, I actually want a tiny rework. Enemies that are now frozen in time can still receive damage, but the freeze in time duration would be reduced from 2 seconds to 1.5 seconds. There has been many gadgets that were like, it's similar to your basic attack and it gives a similar effect to a stun. Sandy's second gadget used to be 1.5 seconds, got nerfed to 1 second. Same goes for Cordelia's. But though that's because both of them could play very aggressive with that interrupt ability, not to mention that Sandy's second gadget actually interrupted abilities, and because the freezing time, it's in my eyes the weakest out of all of those three effects, I think that it's fair for these freezing time thing to last 1.5 seconds instead of just 1 second. And honestly, not receiving damage while you're frozen in time, it's just kinda weird overall. The star powers, I won't really change anything. I think that they're good as they are. There is nothing too special about them, but at the same time, I feel like they each serve their purpose, so they should be kept as they are. As for a new mythic gear, it would be called We've Got Time. The super will now last 2 additional seconds, so it's a good extra. The super now lasts 2 more seconds. Pretty good mythic gear overall. I think it's worth the value. As for the hypercharge, it would be called Time to Shine. It would cost 2.85 supers, give you 25% bonus damage, 5% shield, and 26% speed. And the effect would be that your super would be 50% larger. It would have a 50% larger radius. On top of that, when you drop the super, enemies within the radius would get frozen in time for 1 second. This is very similar to Sandy's hypercharge, but instead of giving a speed boost, it's just a larger super, and instead of a silence, it would be a freezing time. So there isn't much it can go wrong with this hypercharge, and I just think it would fit things very well. Freeze, and also have a larger radius, which would give so much value to slowing down projectiles. I could see the hypercharge being really helpful for Finx. And there you have it, all of Finx's problems and even how I would fix them. What are your thoughts on Finx and on the changes as well? Write your opinion in the comments down below, trust me, I will read them. And I'll see you on the next video.